We're ways into 2021, but there is a ton of great action games to look forward to. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, 25 new action games in 2021. Just as a quick note before we get started, there are a lot more action games that are likely coming in fall 2021 that haven't been announced yet, so keep that in mind. But this is a pretty extensive list, so let's get going. Starting off at number 25, it's Samurai Warriors 5, the latest in the Warriors franchise. This one is a reimagining of the samurai version of it, but will retain all of the gameplay flourishes we've all come to expect from this series. They're actually going to be limiting the scope of the story to a very, very specific time period, the events leading up to the Hanoji incident in the Sengoku period. It's been a while since a Samurai Warriors game has come out, so it's good that they're going to be refreshing it and trying some different angles, but let's also keep in mind what happened when they tried out an open world with Dynasty Warriors 9. Wasn't that great. Hopefully this remedies that. Samurai Warriors 5 is landing on June 24th. At number 24 is Necromunda Hired Gun, an indie FPS set in Warhammer 40k's most infamous Hive City. Now, not only is it a pretty interesting looking setting with a lot of different things like lava fountains and whatnot, it also boasts some pretty intense weapon and augment customization and a lot of upgrade capabilities. It looks like a pretty different looking game in terms of genre, and it's one I'm definitely going to play when it lands on June 1st. At number 23 is It's Naraka Bladepoint, which is a 60-player battle royale, which is based in a lot of different types of weapons, but they're really kind of selling it on swords. The two big things going on in this game are parkour and a grappling hook, and the mobility that is capable that we've seen in various footage of the game is definitely what makes it unique. Now, we don't have a release date yet, but it is a really promising looking game, and we'll try out Naraka Bladepoint when it hits. At number 22 is The Ascent, a cyberpunk action RPG in a city controlled by a mega corporation called the Ascent Group, which mysteriously collapses and the city descends into some kind of basically total chaos. It's a twin-stick shooter that's played from a top-down perspective, which is at least a novel perspective to take on a cyberpunk game, lest we be running the aesthetic into the ground. It looks like an interesting game. I think it probably has its most potential as a co-op, but we will see. We don't have a specific date for it, but it is landing sometime this year. At number 21 is V Rising, a massively multiplayer vampire hunting and settling game in which you are exploring and taming a huge open world with the intent on becoming the next Dracula. Basically, you're building a vampire colony that you're leading. You can have friends along, you can play it yourself. It looks like an interesting game. It's played from a top-down perspective, has pretty stylized looking graphics, lots of color. Honestly, it could be really interesting. V Rising does not have a date, but it is landing sometime in 2021. At number 20 is Warhammer 40k Darktide, which is a new kind of 4-player co-op Left 4 Dead style game, except with the Vermintide melee combat style, which I think is ultimately going to be a pretty good combination. You and 3 friends against hordes of various Warhammer enemies, choosing a class, customizing your skill set, and ultimately progressing through what could be a pretty interesting game. Vermintide 2's combat is great. We talked a lot about that a few years ago when that came out, and frankly I think that it will drop into this style game quite good. It doesn't have a release date yet, but we will definitely be looking out for Warhammer 40k Darktide. And number 19 is Scarlet Nexus, an action RPG coming from Bandai Namco, a game where the combat is centered around melee attacks and also the use of psychokinesis. So you're probably going to be doing physics stuff during combat, which is cool. You can upgrade those various abilities by going through a skill tree. I think it may be pretty interesting to be throwing around objects at people in combat, and I think that if it actually lives up to what that sounds like it could be, and doesn't turn out to be kind of just a button masher, that could be a really interesting playstyle. Scarlet Nexus is landing on June 25th. At number 18 is Dungeons & Dragons Dark Alliance, a third-person action RPG who was previously known for Livelock, which is an interesting twin-stick shooter. It's set in the Icewind Dale region and seems to be a straight action RPG, something along the lines of Diablo. It is set after the Crystal Shard in terms of where it's placed in the lore, and it's Dungeons & Dragons. I mean, a lot of great video games come from that franchise. It's landing on June 22nd. At number 17 is Tales of Arise, the latest RPG in the Tales series. It's probably going to build on everything you know about the previous game. That's basically how this series of games has gone, but it's always been very good too. I'm not saying that to say like, oh, it's just another Tales game. They pretty much knock it out of the park every time. They've developed on top of the linear motion battle system, and frankly, the graphics to this one look absolutely beautiful. They've really outdone themselves. At number 16 is Atomic Heart, which is kind of looking like a Soviet BioShock. It does build on some of the more action RPG oriented elements though, in that there's a crafting system, there's various upgrades, and it seems like it really leans into that aspect, but also you can definitely see the BioShock formula. It's interesting because you can kind of see these weird makeshift weapons as well as these techno-organic powers. It's also a really cool setting. It's alternate reality 1955 USSR, and you play a mentally unstable KGB agent investigating a manufacturing facility. We do not have a date for Atomic Heart yet, but this is one that I am extremely interested in and will have to play. It's landing sometime later in the year. At number 15 is Back 4 Blood, a new Left 4 Dead style game from the original creators of Left 4 Dead. It's basically what happens when Turtle Rock, the developers of the original game, split from Valve and has over time reestablished itself as an independent studio. There's not a lot to say about this other than it's a new Left 4 Dead game, which is something that everybody's wanted for a really long time. It's not called Left 4 Dead, but you know what it is. I will be playing it, you'll be playing it, it'll be lots of fun. It's landing on October 12th, look out for it. At number 14 is Evil West, a solo or co-op third-person shooter in which you'll be fighting vampire monsters in the Old West. And why wouldn't you? Now, you probably remember the trailer to this game. It's a really slick, cool looking, look at how badass this cowboy is shooting all of these vampires type action sequence, but it doesn't really show exactly what we're getting with the game. The developers characterize the combat as stylized, lightning-paced, and gory, and the game itself is a story-driven campaign. I think it has potential. I want to see how it plays. We don't have a date yet, but the potential is there. Number 13 is Chivalry II, a first-person slasher meant for multiplayer. Chivalry II is a game that brings us back to what is a fantastic multiplayer hack-and-slash brawling type medieval chaos-a-thon. I don't want to get too far into detailing how the original game was, because it's a beloved game, a lot of people know. It's multiplayer hack-and-slash medieval stuff, and for all intents and purposes, this is that, plus a lot more customization options and way better graphics. Chivalry 2 is landing on June 8th. At number 12 is Deathloop, the latest game from Arcane Studios, which looks very much like a faster pace, building on the ideas that we saw in the Dishonored series, which is based in a more futuristic setting in which you, an assassin, are living through a death loop where you're fighting against another assassin, as well as performing various Dishonored-style assassination missions. Given it doesn't look like we're getting another Dishonored, at least for a while, this is basically what I want to see out of Arcane. It also has a great aesthetic, sort of looking like a 70s exploitation movie. I think it brings enough unique stuff to the table without being just a total rehash of Dishonored, while appealing to somebody who would want to play more Dishonored. I'm excited for the game. It comes out on September 14th. At number 11 is Far Cry 6. The game is set on a fictional Caribbean island, dictatorship based on Cuba, which is something we should all interrogate. It's apparently going to be the biggest Far Cry open world that they've created, which is good, and the game's been in development for 4 years, so it might actually be a little more interesting than the previous Far Cries, because they were really churning them out there for a little while. We all basically know what to expect from these games, so I hope that they're able to build on it in a way that is not just iterative, but brings something new to the table, and that's going to be hitting sometime later in the year. At number 10, Bright Memory Infinite is a new action FPS where you're combining a lot of skills and abilities as well as shooting in a futuristic metropolis in which two worlds are dimensionally connected and you have to basically cut through all of it. What we've seen of the game is a lot of different traversal options. It's very fast-paced. You're going to be using a combination of guns and swords, and you're going to be seeing a combination of city and like rural Japanese countryside. It's a really interesting looking game with a female protagonist that we don't have a release date for just yet, but it's definitely an interesting looking one. At number 9 is Severed Steel, a fast-paced, fluid, stunt-based single-player FPS with destructible environments, bullet time, and frankly, in every possible way, looks very unique. In some ways, it reminds me of John Wick, but in others, like the environmental destruction brings in a totally different element. This is a hugely stylized-looking game, and frankly, one that looks like it could take up a ton of your time just doing stunt runs. We don't have a specific date for it, but it is coming sometime in 2021. Severed Steel looks very good. At number 8 is Monster Hunter Rise, which is a slightly different take on the Monster Hunter world formula, which builds on a sort of verticality that wasn't necessarily present and introduces a lot of moves that do that specifically. Another primary difference between Rise and World is that Rise runs on the Resident Evil engine, and for all intents and purposes, I think might be a more interesting game than World. The graphics are a little bit pared down from Monster Hunter World because it's a Switch game, but I did find myself enjoying it a little bit more so than World. It came out back in March, and it's a really good game. You should check it out. And number 7 is No More Heroes 3, a action-adventure hack-and-slash satirical, goofy comic book type game that continues the mainline No More Heroes series. If you're familiar, this one takes place 9 years after No More Heroes 2 and 2 years after Travis Strikes Again, and this is actually the first open world version of this series since the first game. No More Heroes 3 is hitting the Nintendo Switch on August 27th. And number 6 is Dying Light 2, a game that got delayed a while back and has always been interesting looking because they've attempted such a different narrative structure where the choices are supposedly going to have a huge effect on what's available, what you can do, what path you have to take, etc., but also improves upon the parkour and enemies of the original Dying Light. It's kind of one we've talked about for a while, and if the promises that they've put out regarding this game turn out to work, if that's what we get, then it's going to be a great game. It's really a matter of if it lives up to the hype. We do not have a date for it yet, but supposedly we're seeing it this year. At number 5 is Biomutant, an open world game with some hack and slash and exploration elements that has you creating a little mutant critter where all of your physical appearance changes actually change the abilities and statistics of the little critter. This is also a game that we've talked about for a really long time. It's been continually delayed, and it's always looked like it has a lot of promise, but then when it gets near release time, they always delay it again. It is landing this month, actually, May 25th, so it seems like it's really happening because it's pretty close to that date to go back on it, so let's cross our fingers. At number 4 is The Day Before, a game we talked about in its own video not long ago. It's this game that looks kind of like something between The Division and Last of Us mashed up. It's interesting because the world itself is actually very rich in detail, lots of different stuff. There's also online PvP and co-op. In a lot of ways, it could be a really interesting game because a lot of the combat looks derived from Last of Us as opposed to The Division. So setting it in a kind of Division-like setting it's interesting. It looks like it might be something different. We don't have a date for that, but it is coming soon. At number 3 is Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, which not only looks like a great new entry to Ratchet and Clank, but also serves as a huge tech demo for the PlayStation 5 and its SSD. The quick loading allows for some amazing teleportation stuff, but it looks like, aside from that, just a solid entry in the game. After the remake of the original Ratchet and Clank, they had to up the ante. Obviously, it's a very good looking version of the game, and they have. Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart is coming on June 11th. At number 2 is Halo Infinite, the must-have killer app for the new Xbox. Halo Infinite follows the story of Master Chief after Halo 5 Guardians, and it's been delayed a bit, so I'm personally getting ready for it. It seems like a lot of what they're trying to do is evoke Halo 2 and 3 in terms of design. It's a new Halo game. Most people are excited for a new Halo game, right? It is going to be landing sometime in the second half of the year, hopefully sooner rather than later, but I would expect holidays. And finally, at number 1 is Horizon Forbidden West. Zero Dawn is such a good open world game, and everything about Forbidden West just looks like a huge upping of the ante. We see stuff like San Francisco's Golden Gate Bridge like in a state of decay. Because this stuff happens so far into the future, people don't have any idea what it even is, and that's cool. Also, still fighting robot dinosaurs. That's kind of what lures you into Horizon anyways. So yeah, the story is apparently finding out more about the old world and your character's lineage. Everything about it looks amazing. It is landing sometime later in the year. I would also, again, expect holidays for this. It's probably going to be a system seller. Couple of bonus games for you. First is Glitch Punk, a top-down brawler and shooter, which in terms of aesthetic, it definitely lives up to its name. Looks kind of like Grand Theft Auto. Looks a little bit more combat-oriented, though. Next is Boomerang X, a weapon oriented very significantly around traversal. It works basically like a grappling hook. It's a very cartoony looking game, but a very cool looking game. Great action. That's got a demo if you're interested in trying it. Next is Nier Replicant version 1.22474487139. Yes, that's the actual name of the game. It is a remake of the original Nier. They updated the combat to be more like Nier Automata's, and it is great. It looks significantly nicer, and it's a very interesting story that sort of subverts a lot of expectations. Next is Trepang 2, which is kind of a Fear-like game. We never really got a Fear sequel, but it is oriented towards that type of gameplay where you have a lot of bullet time fighting. There is a demo that is currently out if you're interested in trying that. They don't have a date, but supposedly it's landing this year. And finally, Hunt Down, a side-scrolling arcade shooter, very much like the games of yesteryear. It does bring a lot to the gameplay that you may not have expected though, and the graphics are phenomenal. That is all for today. Leave us a comment, let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. Best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription, so click subscribe. Don't forget to enable all notifications. And as always, thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at Falcon the Hero. We'll see you next time, right here on gameranx.